now that we've kind of talked about the project a little bit, let's jump into ZBrush, and we're going to kind of, design's going to take a back seat for a second, and intro to ZBrush is coming up, all right? So we're actually using an older version of ZBrush, and that's perfectly fine. The only thing to know about ZBrush is it's not backwards compatible. So I think it's like ZBrush 5R1, whatever is out now. If I sculpted something in that, I would not be able to open it in here. If you really want to know how to do that, I have a few shortcuts that I can show you guys later. But any version of ZBrush will work that is later than ZBrush 3.1. We're not going to start with like a base mesh. Like I have a whole library of base meshes, and what a base mesh is like almost like an armature or a 3D model that was either built in Maya or Modo or 3ds Max. I'm going to stick all inside ZBrush, and I'm going to show you guys how you can start from your own, because in production I will use assets that I've started with before, like the alien grunt that I showed you guys. That actually started off as the Capri Sun alien, and I was able to go to the lower subdivision level, basically cut some time in half and put more time into the design than building a new mesh to sculpt on. But today I want to focus on showing you guys how you can start from scratch. So let me show you what I like to do is when you open up ZBrush, you have this kind of little light box that is going to come down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Dynamesh 32. And when I click on that, it's going to open up this project. And we're going to talk about what Dynamesh is now. So Dynamesh allows you to, while you work, I'm going to grab the move brush here. I'm going to turn on this poly frame. So we're going to start with a sphere. We're going to start to move it around to create a bust. And you'll notice as I'm working, some of these polygons are starting to stretch and kind of look like crap. Like it's just not even manageable to work on. All right? So how do we fix that? Well, originally what a lot of people would do is hit divide, basically adding more subdivisions. And what you see here is like this, this model right now is 2,790 active points. Well, when I subdivided, it made 11,000. So like we're progressively getting higher, and we'll have a little bit more resolution there. Well, the problem is though, look at basically the density. Here, you see how it's kind of nice and even throughout. And then down here, we still have a bit of that stretching, even though there's more subdivision levels, that's not evenly distributing them throughout the mesh. So that can be kind of a bit of a pain. Well, since we started with Dynamesh 32, oh my goodness. Some of you may have no idea what happened, but that is magic right there. This is fantastic, okay? So what I did while using Dynamesh is under the geometry tab, there's this little orange button that says Dynamesh. And since we started with Dynamesh 32, by default, it is on. And all I'm doing is moving the mesh, just using the move brush, and I have a very large size brush. You'll start to notice that stretching. All I'm going to do is hold on the PC, it's Command, and I'm dragging. And you're seeing this mask being drug out. Now when I drag that mask onto the character, it's going to make it so I can't affect the masked area. But when I hold Command and drag it on the canvas, you'll see it that it remeshes it, so everything has that nice even topology throughout the whole mesh, okay? Those of you that are completely new to ZBrush, this is really the only huge technical limitation that you may have. I'm going to show you some other advanced techniques, but if you can grasp this one thing, you can sculpt whatever you want. You can take this one sphere and turn it into a whole body, all right? Is that clear? Does anyone have any questions on that? We'll do more of it because we're going to take the sphere and kind of stretch it out into our creature. The main thing I'm thinking about when I'm designing a character at this point, very early on, where you literally have a blob, is I'm thinking about the silhouette. I'm not thinking about any sort of details yet. Sometimes you'll get this little graphical error. Just hit Control-N and it clears the canvas. Just kind of a little common mistake that might happen every now and then. So since the first grunt I did had very large ears, I think I'm going to do some smaller ears at this point because I want to introduce some variation. See those polygons stretching? What am I going to hit? Command and drag on the canvas. What it's doing is, by default, ZBrush, when you turn it on, you'll see, let me turn that white, kind of like gray. You see how over on the right ear, you see that kind of like big cursor, and that's where my pen is. If you notice on the left, see that little red dot? That's symmetry. So that's one of the awesome things about working digitally. So thank you for bringing that up. That anything I do on one side, it's going to do on the other. Now at some point, I will turn off symmetry by hitting X. You see that little red dot on the left turning on and off? All I'm doing is hitting X. X is the hotkey to turn symmetry on and off. This early on, we're going to leave symmetry on as we're trying to block it out as a whole. Another hotkey we're going to use is if I hold Shift, you'll notice my cursor goes blue. And what that is it's smoothing the mesh. This early on, you know, like Brian, what are you smoothing? There's like no information at this point. Well, what it's able to do is basically kind of refine some of that information, and it's going to create planes. Planes are critical for you to know. ZBrush, you guys will learn. It's a program. It's like riding a bike. You know, like you didn't just hop on a bike and just go. You know, you had training wheels. You'll learn that. Planes are the difficult thing for people to learn every time I teach it. And what planes are is basically the figure. Like a lot of people make very round shapes, but planes make up a figure. So holding Shift here, you see how I'm starting to add some planes to the figure? What this is going to do is create a nice strong foundation. Artist by the name of Bridgman, like if you look at Bridgman's drawing books, he's incredibly fantastic. To me, it's where I learned about planes, at describing the planes of the figure and how these simple shapes make up a complicated form. So I like using the Shift button to use as a way to describe those planes. So I like the idea of the grunts having no eyes because I think it desensitizes them. That's a design point. Like if I don't know if it's an active choice that a lot of people make. I know some people do, but like a good example is like Call of Duty or most military games. If you look at a lot of the enemies that you're fighting, they have all like military garb on, where they have like the balaclavas and basically where there's no skin showing, goggles, all this gear. And if we look at actual reference, a lot of soldiers do have that. As a design standpoint, what I would like to think a lot of games do is they do that because it desensitizes the character. Because every character that's popping out at you is trying to kill you. And for me, one thing that was a little difficult with like Uncharted is, you know, we had these treasure hunters fighting Drake, and Drake just shoots everybody. Like he had like no moral, just killing every single dude. But when we started putting armor and like different wraps on guys' heads, it was desensitizing the player and allowing it to be more of a gameplay element than Drake being this murderer, just like, I'm getting treasure, I don't care, this is mine. You know, it kind of took it back a little bit. And that's a good thing, and it's also kind of a scary thing as well. Another two examples of that for me is Jason Voorhees, oddly enough. Like, I don't think he's a shining example of a strong character design. But for me as a child, one thing that always terrified me of him and Michael Myers are these white, emotionless masks, and you cannot see their eyes. So when these villains would have these characters and victims, and they're killing them, and they're up close, there's no reasoning with it, you know? Like the other, which I think is a good example, is Jaws. So when Jaws is eating Quinn on the back of the boat and the ship is sinking, all you see are these massive, like fist-sized black eyes that it's literally just a machine. Like it feels like a meat grinder or something. It has life to it, but like Quinn couldn't have like stopped and looked Jaws in the face and been like, whoa, 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 bro, we got to talk about this. I have family. Like there's no reasoning with it whatsoever. And for me, removing eyes is going to desensitize this character and make it a little bit more utilitarian and really emphasize its job. And so we're going to emphasize the nose and the mouth. Those are going to be our focal points on this creature. I'm going to use the clay tubes brush. I like to use clay tubes because it actually feels like clay. Just a little ZBrush interface. This area, when I say canvas, is referring to the canvas, and this is my working area. When I go to grab a tool, think of this area up here. This is your brush palette, and I like to think of this as like my tackle box where I'm keeping all my sculpting tools, all right? It's like in Photoshop where you would have all your brushes, okay? In here, it's a little daunting because you open it and you look at all these brushes that you have. But if you look at the top, this quick pick, these are going to be all the brushes that you just recently hit. So like if I hit inflate, you'll now notice under the quick pick, that wasn't going to up. Yeah, there it is. Inflate, you've got clay tubes. So you can quickly go up there and hit those. I don't teach the use of customizing hotkeys for brushes for Intro to ZBrush because I think it's a little unfair for me to just sit here being like mashing 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, and you're just like where are those brushes? Like what magic, what sorcery is this? So I'm going to show you where everything is, and then on the final day, if you want to know a little bit about customizing, we can go into that, okay? The main brush that I use when I start out from the beginning is the move brush, and what I just think about that as is, I'm going to relate everything back to a traditional standpoint, is we've got this character in clay in front of us, and I'm not using sculpting tools on it at this point. I'm using my hands to make big movements and big changes in the character. I'm using the move, scale, and rotate over here, and I will be perfectly honest, there are hotkeys. So it's, yeah, like if I hold Alt, that's moving it this way. And then if I hit, like I let go of Alt and hold Shift, that's zooming it. I never learned that. That's like how incompetent I was at 3D. And I knew, oh, if I come over here to the right, this is move, this is scale. All I'm doing is literally just clicking, scaling, and rotating. And out of all the projects I've ever worked on, I've never gone back to learn the like I literally had to sit here and think about those ZBrush hotkeys. You know, some people are like, well, dude, doesn't that slow you down? No. And honestly, what it does for me is it gives me a chance to step back. Because what I physically have to do is take my hand off of the sculpture. Because especially like I work on a Cintiq and my hand is physically right here on it. When I take it off, what it is, it would be like when I was sculpting traditionally, and I would stand up, look at my sculpt, and come back. So what I'm literally doing is just stepping away and looking at the character. But if you want to be a fancy hotkey user, by all means, I will not hold you back. I think the big thing that intimidates people with ZBrush is how many people are just afraid of breaking it. Like that was my biggest problem when I started using the computer. I would just be working and like something like this would happen. Like I'd accidentally hit edit and then just be like, oh God, oh God, okay, that's it. Like I'm not using digital. All right, common mistake. All it is think about this. What you're doing is every time you're clicking and dragging, you're taking your tool or your sculpture and putting it on the canvas. But you want to sculpt on it now, right? And sculpting, you're editing something. So if you want to edit something, you need to be in edit mode, all right? But now we've got all this crap up here. How do you get rid of that? Little shortcut, we're going to hit Control-N. All Control-N is doing is clearing the canvas, okay? Literally the most common mistakes, so do not feel bad. First time I opened up ZBrush, that like default dog was just everywhere, just going nuts. Let's do this. Nice segue. I'm going to open up the subtool palette, and what the subtool palette's going to be is I want you to think of it almost like layers in Photoshop, but not as far as editing goes, but as far as managing stuff goes. If you learn anything from me in this 5 weeks, is I hope I give you enough encouragement to open ZBrush and that you learn to never touch layers inside of ZBrush. Playing with layers, not subtools, but the actual physical layer system, which is supposed to be what you'd think it'd be, where it's like, oh, I want to edit this, I'm going to put it on a layer. Oh, I don't like that, I'll turn it off. Playing with layers in ZBrush is like Russian roulette, where it's like, I don't know. Is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? Am I going to corrupt all my file? Am I going to lose everything? I don't know. You're a professional, you have deadlines, you have stuff you need to get done. I say I'm a professional, I act like one sometimes. Don't play with this because it doesn't work, and especially like I poly paint my information. I know a lot of concept guys use this as a base, and then paint over on top of it, but I'm gonna show you guys how to paint in 3D. And using layers and painting in 3D do not mix at all, okay? So we're gonna use subtools, but not layers, all right? If I see anyone using layers, it's 10 lashes. So now that we have subtools, what I'm gonna do is go to append. And this is one thing, if you look at ZBrush's terminology for everything, like edit, append, it's not necessarily like, I wouldn't say like sculpt. Like maybe that button I would have called like sculpt because we're sculpting. But if you think about edit, we're physically editing the mesh right now. So it kind of makes sense why that button is called that. And now we want to add like, let's add eyes to this character. Just for an example, we're not going to have them, but just to show you how to add something, we're going to attach it, or like what's another word for attach? Maybe append? All right. And also, if you're ever curious, in ZBrush, if you hold Control and hover over a button, it'll physically have a text box pop up and tell you what that button does. All right? So just Control and hovering over something is going to give you kind of like, hey, don't tell anyone, but guess what? This is what I do. All right? So I'm going to hit append, and we have all of these default shapes in ZBrush. So like a sphere would be a good basis to do an eyeball. So now you'll see on another subtool layer, and I'm just clicking on these two objects, and I'll turn on polyframe, and that's just going to show the mesh, but it'll also show you me navigating between the two subtools. So yeah, it's very easy to attach and append stuff, and we're going to do a lot of that. This guy, probably either late today or early tomorrow, we're going to put little teeth on him. Okay?